Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Dolores Tarver. I am a licensed psychologist here in Georgia, and y'all, it's time for this good tea. Tea Time with Dr. Tarver is a wellness podcast. It is not intended to be a substitute for a licensed mental health provider. So here we are in July. We've got about 2 more weeks to go before we close out the month. We are still in BIPOC Mental Health Awareness Month. So Black, Indigenous, People of Color Month, as we're talking about mental health and issues related to people of color. And of course, a lot of you in summertime are going to visit family, and I know that we cannot go and visit family without thinking about these family roles that we were in our families and may still be in our families. I was traveling myself, so you all forgive me for not having a podcast last week. A sister was tired, so she took a little break. But as I was on the plane traveling to see family, so I'm really liking this book that I'm reading, Healing the Shame That Binds You by John Bradshaw, because it just has so much good information to me. You all know I like a good book about family dynamics, and it has so much good information to me about families, internalized shame, the shame within families that we pass down. But I happen to be on the section talking about family roles as I'm traveling. So this is where our topic for today comes from, which is falling in and out of control of myself, roles in family. So Bradshaw talks a lot in his book about not only these roles that we're in, but also just this dynamic we go back and forth with in terms of trying to be over controlled and then not having any control at all, right? So we vacillate between the two, because what ends up happening is when I'm over control, guess what? I can't keep on to that forever. It's exhausting, it's rigid. And so sometimes I just get tired and I'm like, whatever. And that's when I start getting to a point where I'm not controlling anything and I'm just letting stuff go. And so that's when I'm at risk for some of these impulsive behaviors or doing things that are particularly outside of my character. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So family roles. Every one of us grew up in a family where we were assigned a role. I like to look at it in a way of thinking about being in a play, right? So you're being cast for a play and you are in this role, this character that has been created to fit within this family. And frequently what ends up happening is the supporting characters are what allows your role to be able to function in the way that it does. Same thing happens in our families. So you might have been the cut up, the jokester in the family. You might have been the athlete in the family. You might have been the scholar, the brilliant person in the family. You might have been the very talented songbird in the family. You may have been the actress or the actor in the family. You may have ended up being someone who was a caregiver, taking care of people. You may have been an enabler, the person that made those excuses for, well, let's not just be so hard on, let's think about. You may have been that parent who was the fun parent. You may have been the super parent that went to everything and tried to take care of and anticipate your kids' every need. You might have been the saint in the family. You never did anything wrong. You might have been the perfectionist in the family or the martyr in the family. Why do all of these things keep happening to me? You might have been the loser, because oftentimes in families we have the winner, the achiever. So there has to be, right? So we talk about supporting cast members. There has to be someone in the family who doesn't quite measure up in the same way. That's the person we often scapegoat in our families. Maybe I was mom or dad's buddy in the family, or the religious one in the family that always had a word, that I was very much attentive to your behavior so that I could talk to you about how they were or were not in alignment with the word of God. You might have been the peacemaker in the family. You might have been the problem solver in the family, the person that everyone comes to handle things. But whatever it was, you had a role. And sometimes we don't think about what that role was, but I guarantee you that role affected you, and it affected your siblings. If you were an only child, that role definitely affected you being an only child, because the emphasis was just on you. And maybe you were cast in membership with cousins or family friends growing up. So what are the effects? Why is this important? A lot of times, because of those roles, and you think about, some of them we say, well, some of those are positive. Like, so if I was the person that excelled or the talented person in the family or the person that was able to solve things and help take care of other people, like those are good things, right? And I will tell you that everything has pros and cons, right? So, because again, that means there was comparison that went on in families. And even though we say that comparisons, well, we love all our children the same, so we don't compare one to the other. Yes, we do. And our kids compare themselves to each other. And so what ends up happening is we can have animosity between siblings, so jealousy can occur, envy. You got mom's attention or dad's love, and they ignored me. They weren't receptive to me. They weren't responsive to me. You may have had families where there was, multiple families. So we're talking about there may have been step families or siblings that might have had a different parent. You had a shared parent, but they had a different parent, blended families, if you will. And so we're talking about the blended family. So maybe the younger kids got a different version of one of the parents than the older kids did. Or maybe in our family, mom was dealing with alcoholism when you came along, but she wasn't dealing with it when the younger siblings came along. So you got two different mothers. Some people get two different fathers, and you can build a lot of resentment because, again, my role is also based on whatever my family members have going on too. So whatever wounds my parents have, my caregivers have, guess what? Those become a part of the role I play in the family too, because often those are what my roles are created from, because our parents, our caregivers, they get their needs met through us as well, just like we get needs met from them. That's not always healthy. So maybe I was a sexualized one in the family. So now what's happening for me is I can often recreate my victimization, whether it was a sexual victimization or in that case of being the caregiver for the family, because maybe I was the oldest. So I had to take care of my younger siblings, make sure they ate, make sure they got to school, make sure they did their homework. And so I continue to play that role in all of my relationships, and I'm resentful about taking care of everyone and my deferred dreams that I feel like I had. You got to go do all of these other things because I sacrificed. And I'm still playing that role out today. We'll get back together for family reunions and I'll remind you of all of the things that I could not do because I was required to take care of you. There can be a lot of bitterness and anger and rage. We're angry about some of these roles, how you were treated versus how I was treated. If I had missed opportunities, if I didn't get a chance, maybe money wasn't available. For some of us had different experiences financially. Maybe the family was in a good place when I was born, and then all of a sudden something happened to our resources and it changed and things changed for me. So my role in the family had to change as a result of those financial differences that happened. Maybe there is this arrogance that now, right, because we have this exaggerated sense of importance because the role that I played in the family was everybody kept telling me how amazing I was and I got doted on for whatever reason. And there's gender bias that exists in these roles as well. And so maybe I was the only male child in a family full of females. And so I got doted on and was made to feel special and privileged because I was only male. So maybe my sisters had to do the chores in the house, had to take care of things, but I wasn't expected to do that. Or maybe because I played piano, didn't want to mess up my hands. Or maybe because I was the sick one in the family, the one that everybody needed to take care of. Then I got out of doing things because, oh, we don't want you to get sick. We don't want you to end up having any problems. You're fragile, right? Or maybe I was the youngest, and so people did everything for me. So now I'm used to everybody taking care of me. I got a chance to be kind of coddled, if you will, and didn't have to take responsibility for things. But it also didn't allow me to ever grow up and have to do things independently. It caused me to be dependent on other people. It could cause me to be really judgmental in my family. So now I'm very critical of other people. I could be critical of people because maybe I'm the religious one. I feel like you all aren't living up to what God would have you to do, but really, I don't feel good about me. I'm not whole. Because often this is where judgment comes from. This is where bitterness comes from. This is where resentment comes from in the family. I didn't get what I needed in this family. And so now I'm judgmental of you. And so now I become judge and jury for you and pointing out all the mistakes that you've made because really I'm not happy with how my life turned out. It can lead to feelings of powerlessness and helplessness because again, if I was in the family role in which everyone did for me, now I don't know how to do things for myself, Or maybe because my role was conditional, so I only got validated if I completed certain things, whether they were academic successes or where they were, I needed to come and do things for you. Some of them might have been sexual, some of them might have been you need to go out and get a job, take care of this family. Some of them might have been you needed to take care of your siblings, whatever it was. And so now I feel this sense of powerlessness because I only know how to do what I'm told to do. I can become very other focused if I'm used to caring for people and I don't know how to take care of myself. People pleasing is something that comes out of that. And so I feel like the only way I was able to get validated in my family is if I, again, did things you liked. So siblings only wanted to play with me or take me places if I would do stuff for them. Right? So I'll do your chores for you, right? So I'm so used to being in this role of I have to give you something in order for me to receive something. I don't know how a relationship is supposed to function. So I end up getting taken advantage of a lot of times in relationships. Again, I'm perpetuating my own victimization again because that's what happened in my family. I only know how to flirt and be seductive. And I only think that I'm good for sex and that my body is the way that I get access to things. Or I only know to work really hard. And so I'm becoming overconsumed with work because what ends up happening is we can develop these obsessions and compulsions. And so we've talked about substance abuse, and that's a common one. Eating is a common one. But as we talk about these patterns of coming in and out of these mechanisms of trying to get control in place, some of the things that we do, we overeat, we undereat, we utilize these substances to numb, but I also may be looking for ways to get validation through work. So I'm working excessively hard. My parents weren't there for me, so I'm becoming super parent. So I'm there for everything, and it's wearing me out. And I don't even have an identity outside of my children. So when you no longer need me, little humans, then who am I going to be because I don't have an identity underneath that? We're trying to get our feelings needs met in any way that we can, just looking for someone to connect to. And so we end up being in these very unhealthy situations with people, and we're just taking anything that we can get because I just want to feel. I want somebody to connect with me, to be there with me. We get in these very codependent relationships, and people mistreat us because we're so desperate to be able to feel some kind of connection to them. And then also we can think that something is meeting a feeling need, an affective need, and it's really not, right? And sometimes how we get in these very promiscuous sexual relationships because we mistake that for intimacy and love and connection when it really is just simply sex. We can get into criminal activity because we want to get some adrenaline pumping, right? Because again, over control or under control, you know what, just whatever, I just let it all go. And then I'm guided by impulse, essentially. And so sometimes we do things to numb, but sometimes we do things to feel. And so I just get this adrenaline going. Or because, again, I didn't have resources otherwise, I learned in this family system because perhaps I was the slick, crafty one in the family, the one who was good at being able to get into spaces and take things without people knowing. Because my family had this need of we don't have resources, we're limited in what we have. And so you have to go out there and you have to get things for this family. And so that is the identity now that I've taken on, that I only know how to take things because that's the only thing that I was ever allowed to be in my family. Like, you better fend for yourself. Nobody's going to be taking care of you. Make sure you eat. You better get your own food. You better figure it out, right? And so I've had to learn how to figure it out. And so what has that led to in terms of my understanding of how I function, not only in my family, but in the community around me? You know, we can overinvest in and get compulsive about school. We can overinvest and get compulsive about making sure that other people are doing what they're supposed to do, right? So there's a lot of different ways that these addictive behaviors can show up, because you really can you can even get addicted to rage. Having to just feel that fury go through you, because that might have been the only emotion you were allowed to express in this role that you grew up in. So I'm addicted to that feeling. That's the only one I know. It makes me feel something, right? So where criticism and blame, I think, and a lot of times I see this a lot in people who grew up in one of those roles that would be perceived as maybe a lesser role, a negative role, right? So we have the stars in the family, and then we have the people that don't quite measure up to the stars, right? Because again, we're engaged in this comparison. So for people that don't measure up, there's a lot of criticism, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of blame. And then for the people that were constantly at the top being told, you're amazing, you're awesome, then it's, am I going to be able to keep this up? And there's all this anxiety. It's all this stress that I'm having to deal with, because I think you're only going to love and care about me if I maintain this. So what if happens if I don't maintain this identity? Which is why a lot of times we struggle. If we're professional athletes, that's all we've done. Then what happens when I transition out of being an athlete? What happens when I transition out of being an entertainer? What happens when I switch a career path that I told, oh, no, I know you're going to be a lawyer when you grow up. And then what happens when I decide I want to do something different? Right? So where does that leave me? Taking stock. So it's really important. I talk to you all a lot about, let me take inventory of how I have been affected, because oftentimes we don't do that work. And that's the important work of, what was my role in the family? Let me sit down and really think about it. And maybe I had several. So I don't want you to think that these roles are mutually exclusive, because you definitely can have been in multiple roles in a family, and definitely at different times, right? So what were my role or roles in my family? Is that role something I'm still continuing to play out in other relationships and dynamics, whether it's work, friends, dating relationships, or partners? Am I still doing these same things? And is it serving me in a way where it's actually allowing me to get what I need? But also, is it true to who I am as my authentic self? Is this something that I chose, the role I decided I wanted to play? Or am I still playing a role that someone created for me back when I was a child? And then two, we have to be mindful of what the role that I'm in, what was it based on, right? So if I'm saying, well, yeah, no, I'm choosing the role that I'm in, but am I choosing this role that I'm in based on outdated information that I received growing up? So am I on this path simply because I was told I was going to be on this path? Now, sometimes that works in positive ways. You were encouraged, you were nurtured. Hey, you got this talent, you got this gift, you have this love and this passion for it. I'm going to make opportunities for you to allow that to happen. But it also can go in a negative way as well, because I know that you have heard people, or maybe it was told to you, say, you're never going to be anything, or you're only going to be able to be this limited thing. You're only good for lying on your back. You're nothing but a knucklehead. All you're going to end up in jail or the grave, right? So am I basing who I am today on this negative information? Or you're not good at math, or you don't have good leadership skills, you don't work well with people. So am I basing that role, that schema, on this outdated information that somebody passed on me who was wounded? And I frequently say to you all, consider the source of this information. Where did I get this notion from, this perception from, this belief from? Because if that person was hurting, they were unhealthy, they were dealing from wounds from the roles that they were playing, then are they the best person to tell me who I am and how I need to show up to be today? And the answer is, more often than not, no, right? So that means I need to figure out what are healthier ways to get my needs met. If I'm doing unhealthy things, if I'm realizing that this role is serving some kind of purpose, because every behavior does serve a purpose, what is the purpose that I'm getting from this role? And is this simply an unhealthy attempt to be able to try to get some control? Because again, going in and out of these control mechanisms, control protects us, we believe, from getting hurt. It creates safety for us. So if I didn't have safety, or I feel like the things around me aren't safe from whatever experiences I had, maybe I had trauma in my family, there was conflict in my family, there were things that I was exposed to in my family, sexual things, physical violence, seeing people engage in criminal activity, not having basic needs met. So if there are things in my family that I have now learned or believe the world not to be a safe place, then am I trying to get some controls in place, cast myself in this role in order to try to keep myself safe? But there are other ways that I can allow myself to feel safe without having to be in this very typecast role. So integration of self is really, really important as we're trying to work through this role in the family that could still be a distorted perception of self, because it is important that my self-perception is based on who I am, my abilities, my talents, my gifts, my purpose, the things that bring me joy, as opposed to something that allowed another person to get their needs met in an unhealthy way in the family. And that means I have to face some of this underlying issues of shame that I may have, this guilt that I may have, these feelings of obligation that I may have in this family. But if I don't do it, who's going to do it? because these are the things that keep me in the role. I'll have these distorted perceptions that I have to be in this role. And so that's what keeps me stuck. So let me really think about what are some of these messages. And this is work that you're likely going to have to do with a licensed professional. It is important to be journaling even outside of session, writing things down. Let me really kind of play out. Think about some examples of family gatherings, memories that you have. Sometimes these things are buried. They'll start coming up as you're doing this work, and that's why it's really important to have a relationship with a professional so that you can be able to process and work through these things. Because what our body does when it is in pain is it's going to do what it can to shut that pain down, right? So we're constantly trying to get out of what we perceive to be negative states of emotion, that uncomfortable stuff that we don't like to deal with, the loneliness, right? The embarrassment, the guilt, the shame, the dissatisfaction with where I am, the comparison, but all these things that are causing me discomfort. These memories that I have, the pain of not having you be emotionally there for me in the way that I needed you, you not meeting not only some of my physical needs, my financial needs, my needs in terms of just food, clothing, safety, shelter, but also just not even showing up in my life in a way to allow me to feel like I was wanted, valued, important, visible. And so I got to deal with all that pain. And so it's going to be important for me to work through that, but also soothe my body in healthier ways. So I don't want to have to go back to this being obsessive or compulsive and some of these negative things. And we do a lot of stuff in shame, right? So we hide, because hiding is a way we protect these shame behaviors and it keeps them going. So think about the things that you feel bad about, that bring you emotional turmoil, that you're embarrassed about, feel guilty about. Like, we do those things in secret. If I'm overeating, I don't do that around people, unless they're overeating too. If I'm undereating, if I'm over restricting, I don't do that in front of people. Purging, I don't do that in front of people. These are things that I do alone in my shame. Right? Reaching out to this person that I know is not healthy for me and that people have told me they're taking advantage of you, they're abusing you, they're doing all right. So I'm reaching out to you. Nobody knows you're coming over here. I'm still dealing with you. We have this relationship. I'm hiding that. We protect those things that are destructive, right? Because again, control, right? So I'm going to keep this thing over here because that's what makes me feel like I'm safe, even though it's not. But it makes me feel that way because that's the role I know. That's what I'm comfortable in. So that means I need to put some light on things and I need to be honest. So I know I have this history of getting involved with people that are unavailable, whether they're married or they're in other relationships or they've told me they don't want anything serious. So I got to talk about that. I got to be honest with myself about that. Hey, when I get lonely at night, I'm scrolling through and I'm seeing all these people in relationships, all my friends are partnered and I'm not. Then I go out and I reach out to this person, this unhealthy person that I know is unavailable to me, just simply to have some semblance of some type of a relationship to fill this void of loneliness, right? Because I don't like this pain. However, it's not doing that. It just makes me feel lonely afterwards because now I'm realizing you can't give me what I need. And so I set up this dynamic to where now this is self-fulfilling prophecy. So now if someone gave the message to me like, ugh, you're never going to be anybody's wife. Nobody's going to want to deal with you. Nobody's going to want you to have you as a partner. Now that's my role, right? That I was typecast in the family. So now I'm in that role because I placed myself in there by doing these behaviors that keep it going. So I have to learn how to deal with the critical me that shames me, that perpetuates these things, that whose script is based on some of these distortions. I've got to deal with me. I've got to forgive me. I've got to love me and empower me and see me, affirm me, recognize that I have to separate out my behavior from my character. Right? So I am a person who made some mistakes because the truth is we are going to make mistakes. We are not going to say things right all the time. We are going to mismanage finances sometimes. We're going to make decisions that seem like it was a good decision in the moment and realize, oop, I didn't have all the information I needed. That was not a great decision. I may get in a job that's not a good fit for me. I may try something in school and not do well at it, but I am going to have moments that cause me distress and unrest. That doesn't mean that I'm unworthy and that I have to stay in this typecast role. It simply means that I made a choice and I can make another choice, right? So I have to forgive me and learn how to problem solve with me. All right, hey, how are we going to address this issue? Do we need some help doing this? And being able to ask for that help and not feel ashamed asking. That doesn't make you a weak person. That doesn't mean that you are incapable of making good decisions. It simply means you realize, I'm struggling with this a little bit. Let me get some support, right? Let me find my people, my tribe, to be able to work me through this. Boundaries are really important in this process because it does mean that you may have to separate yourself from people that cast you in that role or that are supporting characters to keep you in that role, because we don't all change at the same rate at the same time. And so just because I want to change who I was in the family doesn't mean all the rest of the characters want to change. And sometimes people will try their very best to keep you trapped in that role. And so it's really important that you recognize, hey, how are we feeding on each other? So I may need to separate from you all in order for me to not be in this role anymore. So I want you all to know that you can cast yourself in a new role, one that's a good part for you, that's a good fit for you where you are in this life. You don't have to take a role that isn't validating. You don't have to take a role that isn't going to allow you to be this best version of you. But I want you to know that what you do have the power to do is always rewrite your script and write it so it's not coming out of obligation or shame, but it's coming from empowerment, forgiveness, and love. Be encouraged.